What if we took Superman and Horikoshi's masterpiece My Hero Academia and combined the two? What would we get? I don't know, probably something good, but for now, you're stuck with me. So let's get started. This story all starts off with Izuku being sent to Earth, just like every other story starts. And when I say every other, I mean every other. Izuku's pod would crash land outside of a farm, where Inko and Hisashi Midoriya go on to find Izuku as a baby and raise him as their own. Because of this, Izuku ends up being raised in the middle of nowhere, working on a farm with his parents, and being homeschooled, having basically no access to internet, meaning bro has no idea who heroes are until one day, Izuku would actually end up seeing a local channel on his TV showing a villain attack. And once Izuku sees the way that this hero handles the villain attack, Izuku falls in love with the idea of becoming a hero. Not only that, but using his incredible powers to do good. That's exactly what his parents taught him growing up. And Izuku gets to do just that every single day as his job, protecting people. What could be better than that? This would end up consuming Izuku for the majority of his younger life. And eventually when Izuku turns 14, he applies for the UA entrance exam, and one day, Izuku gets a little bored. So he ends up flying over to Mustafu, Japan, where he hears explosions go off in the distance, and would fly over just to go check it out, only to see a blonde-headed boy being attacked by some sort of sludge villain. He immediately swoops in, noticing that none of the heroes around were helping, would grab onto Bakugo's arm, and using his super breath, would blow the sludge villain away, as he would ask Bakugo if he's okay, who would stare at him angrily and in shock. But soon after Izuku realizes what happens and sees the cameras pointing at him, he immediately flies home. But when he gets there, he would immediately be scolded by his parents for going into the city. I mean, his parents already told him not to, and what did Izuku do? He blatantly disobeyed them. So now my boy finna get that whooping. Eventually though, the day comes where Izuku has to go to Japan to take the entrance exam, and he'd get a massive hug from his parents, telling him to go out there and break a leg, as Izuku would immediately fly to UA High to take the exam, and of course, passes the test with flying colors, eventually finding himself face to face with the robot portion of the exam, basically bored, expecting more from UA, considering that this was the greatest school in Japan he had heard, which is honestly kind of disappointing, considering that Izuku is way too strong for this. And eventually, Izuku would find himself face to face with a zero pointer, getting excited, but the second that Izuku throws one punch, he immediately realizes just how weak this thing is, before then punching it up into the air and tossing it straight into outer space. From here, every single teacher watching the intercoms would be shocked, as Izuku would immediately after the test would be over begin getting ready to fly off, when Principal Nezu personally calls Izuku into his office to grant him a full ride scholarship and ask him about his quirk, with Izuku saying he doesn't know much about it considering he's never checked, stunning Nezu, who would end up asking him where he lives, with Izuku pulling a Gohan and saying he lives about 400 miles away on a farm. From here, this would shock Nezu even more, and once Nezu hears this, he would offer Izuku something he just couldn't resist, offering his entire family a home near the school. That way it could be so much easier for Izuku to make his way to school. From here, Izuku would accept, and for the following week, Izuku would train with Nezu until eventually, the first day of school would come around, where as soon as he walks inside, he would notice a blue-haired boy and a blonde one arguing over something. As soon as he sees the boy, he would be shocked that he's in his class. And in this moment, Izuku just smiles and waves. From here though, Bakugo would end up asking him what he's doing here, and it'd be in this moment that he'd be interrupted by Aizawa, who would end up asking them to get changed because they're about to take the quirk apprehension test. And let me just say it, Izuku's gonna blow this test out of the water. It's gonna be way too easy for him. During the test, Izuku would throw the ball into space, reach supersonic speeds in the 50-meter dash, and break the grip string test easily. And after the exam, everyone would crowd Izuku, asking him what kind of quirk he has, its weaknesses, and all those things. But Izuku says he's quirkless, and what he has isn't a quirk but some sort of strength mutation which doesn't exactly classify as one, stunning everybody. As after this, we eventually would get the Day of the Heroes vs Villains events, and before you all get ahead of yourselves, don't, because there's nothing to get ahead of. Why? Because Izuku could destroy anybody who was thrown at him. With Izuku's X-ray vision along with his super speed, he could easily deduce where the bomb's gonna be and immediately rush towards it, knocking out whoever's in his way before then just touching it and hearing, "Hero team wins!" Regardless though, we inevitably get to the USJ arc, in which Izuku displays how undeniably set apart he is to everyone else in this verse, As soon as Kurogiri appears in front of the heroes, Izuku feels something's off, so he immediately rushes in and grabs onto Kurogiri's weak spot using his X-ray vision to see it, as he would then freeze Kurogiri in place and eventually look around the USJ, spotting multiple villains with his X-ray vision, going on to tell Aizawa their location and number, as from here, before Aizawa can say a thing, Izuku would rush at Shigaraki, when suddenly, the Nomu would appear in front of him and punch Izuku in the face, causing Izuku's head to turn ever so slightly. But Izuku would just look at the Nomu and begin turning his head, with the Nomu being honestly shocked and Shigaraki watching in complete fear, as Izuku turns his head towards him, balls his fist up, and punches the Nomu straight into outer space, knowing that thing isn't human. From here, Izuku would turn towards Shigaraki and ask him why he's here, but Shigaraki would rush at Deku and try to decay him, who sorta just lets it happen thinking nothing was gonna hurt him, but in this moment Izuku would actually feel pain. He just got his arm decayed, sort of. But the second that Izuku would feel that, he would grab onto Shigaraki's arm and squeeze it, asking him why he's here. From here, Shigaraki would end up explaining to Izuku exactly why they're here, going on to explain the plan of the Nomu and how the Nomu was supposed to actually kill All Might. But Izuku would laugh, saying that thing would have never hurt All Might. And in this moment, he would end up asking Shigaraki if there's more, going on to use his heat vision, shocking Shigaraki, who would be terrified, who even gives him information about how the real boss isn't himself, but All For One. And Izuku of course knew that Shigaraki wasn't the boss, because there's no way a boss would have ended up cowering the way that Shigaraki did. But Shigaraki is a man-child, so what did he expect? After Deku gets his answers, he informs Aizawa, and Mr. Aizawa tells All Might, who would talk to Deku about One For All, and even would offer him his quirk, but Deku would end up declining it, saying that it's better to have more powerful heroes than just one, and saying thanks, but no thanks. As from here, Izuku's super hearing would hear some explosions off in the distance not too far, and from this moment would look to All Might before saying we have to go, grabbing onto him and flying at the speed of sound, seeing that it's a prison, and not only a prison but Tartarus. He would see that explosions are going off, and immediately Izuku and All Might would jump into action as they both rush in and display their overwhelming power as they try to handle the multitude of villains escaping. But once Izuku notices one villain in particular appear and disappear, he knows Shigaraki's about to escape. So Izuku continues defeating villain after villain, trying to stop him, but eventually he would end up getting away. And with that happening, eventually Izuku and All Might would be able to make all the villains return to their cells, all but one. With that though, we eventually jump into the next day, where Izuku would actually participate in the UA Sports Festival, absolutely demolishing everyone. I mean, it's not even funny or entertaining, so we're gonna be skipping this arc, as well as the Stain arc, because let's be honest, Deku would wipe the floor with Stain in his sleep. And when it comes to the low-end Nomu situation, it doesn't actually end up happening because the League of Villains are keeping a low profile. After this though, we eventually get the final exams for Class 1A, and not only that, but the first ever clash of All Might and Deku. This battle starts off with Deku and All Might staring at each other, as immediately Izuku, using his heat vision, would laser off All Might's weights that he has holding him back, as Izuku would tell him, "Come on All Might, give it your best shot." And from here, Izuku would rush in and punch All Might, who would tank the blow and return an uppercut, as Izuku would be sent flying into the air. And in this moment, Izuku would look down before then shooting heat vision at All Might, who dodges out of the way and rushes towards the direction of Izuku, punching him through a building, appearing and kicking him back. As from here, he goes on to get up from the rubble, Izuku that is, and then All Might would end up landing 60 consecutive blows on him, as Izuku smiles and shows All Might that he took no damage. From here, All Might would look at Izuku in amazement and tell him, "Stop holding back, young man," as Deku says, "You asked for it," and would defeat All Might with a punch that never lands, in a scene super reminiscent to that of Saitama versus Genos. After this happens, All Might would just look up at Izuku in complete amazement, shock, bewilderment. I mean, there's no words to describe the emotions that All Might's feeling in this moment. But if there's one thing that I could say, it's that All Might feels peace, knowing that the next generation will be more than well protected by this young man Izuku. With this, we find ourselves in the Forest of Death arc, and here's where everything changes. All For One in this moment has realized how unbelievably powerful Izuku is watching the sports festival on VillainTube. thinking that this kid is way more of a threat than All Might, seeing that this kid is truly the real deal. So the production of high-end Nomus would skyrocket, and his main goal now would be to capture the boy at any cost necessary, meaning All For One launches a full-scale attack, and during the Forest of Training arc, the villains would arrive, but they would have a much more calculated attack, focusing on capturing as many students as they can and holding them hostage, with All For One even capturing Izuku's parents and holding them hostage as well, making sure that Izuku would hand himself over. And the plan would work. Izuku has no choice but to put himself on the line to save the lives of everyone else. As this happens, all of the students would be released. Once All For One and Izuku arrive to the base, All For One looks towards Izuku, saying, "It's nice to finally make your acquaintance, Izuku Midoriya." Not so nice on this end, All For One. What are you planning? All For One smiles under his mask as he says, "A utopia. A place where the strong will thrive and the weak would be crushed. You know, I'd invite you, but unfortunately I need to be at the top of the food chain. Nothing personal." From here, he begins to attack Izuku with a multitude of quirk attacks and heavily beats Izuku, who's forced to take it, knowing if he retaliates, his parents die. But All For One unfortunately makes one grave mistake while beating Izuku half to death. He tells him exactly how he's gonna kill his mother and father as soon as he thinks Izuku's already close to death, having taken a multitude of extremely powerful quirk attacks already. But in this moment, it's almost as if Izuku regains all his strength. His eyes go red as he would look at All For One and say, "What did you say?" Getting up slowly as he then blitzes at All For One, grabbing him by the throat, All For One being shocked with him trying to save himself by shooting attacks at Izuku, who would tank them while his eyes are glowing red, and he just stares into the eyes of All For One, as from here he would shoot his heat vision point blank at All For One and then throw his body into space, saying, "No more Mr. Nice Guy," as he flies into the base of All For One and would rush at the members there, as well as Nomus, defeating them swiftly, freeing his parents, and eventually Izuku would end up taking down most of the villains that are there, with some of them getting away. But eventually, after all this is finally over, the threat of All For One would be completely get arcs like the Provisional Hero License and the Overhaul arcs, if you could even call them that, considering that they're way too easy. I mean, seriously, Izuku would obliterate Overhaul the instant he finds out the things that Overhaul's doing to Eri, and that's exactly what he would do. Using his super speed, he would immediately punch Overhaul straight into the wall, knocking him out. And with that, we're left with nothing interesting to cover. So the series of MHA basically just turns into a couple of filler episodes until eventually Izuku becomes the #1 hero in Japan. So with that, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Did overpowered Izuku ruin MHA? Because honestly, I'm not too sure. That said though, have a wonderful day. God bless.